Good afternoon, esteemed generals, and welcome to our beloved series, Men Around the Führer. Let us speak now of Baldur von Schirach, a name that echoes through the darkest chambers of history, yet one that belonged to a man often lauded as the greatest young hope of a terrible regime. He was the face of German youth mobilization, a poet of clumsy verses who was catapulted to the pinnacle of power, a man whose life became a complicated braid of inherited privilege, fervent ideological commitment, and profound historical guilt. He was born in Berlin in 1907, a child of the aristocratic bourgeois elite. Yet, despite his German roots, Baldur's heritage was strangely split across the Atlantic, making him, as he was often described, three-quarters American. His mother, Emma Middleton Lina Tillou, hailed from Chestnut Hill, a suburb of Philadelphia. Her ancestry reached back to the southern states, to Henry Middleton, a wealthy plantation owner who was a committed politician and even a signatory of the United States Declaration of Independence in 1776. Indeed, Baldur grew up until the age of 6 speaking English exclusively, only learning German fluently when he went to school a year later than planned. His father, Carl Bailey Norris von Schirach, had once been a captain in the military, stationed in Berlin, before becoming the general director of the Grand Duchy and Court Theatre in Weimar. The Schirach household was one of strict rules and stately circumstances, affording them a luxurious lifestyle, complete with housekeepers, cooks, and servants, typical of the ruling classes. But this environment, seemingly refined, was deeply steeped in anti-democratic and nationalist thinking. It was here, in the heart of Weimar's conservative cultural elite, that the stage was set for the young Baldur's ideological journey. He attended the renowned Wilhelm Ernst Gymnasium, but his formal education soon gave way to a Spartan, nationalist upbringing at the Forest Pedagogium on the Hexenberg Hill. This boarding school experience, which emphasized camaraderie, duty, and responsibility, was built upon an evangelical Christian and strict worldview, glorified German nationalism, and harbored anti-Semitic and anti-capitalist ideas. This time became the central narrative of his adolescence, one he later used to justify the principles he implemented when leading German youth. The fragile foundation of his youth was shattered by a profound family tragedy. His beloved elder brother, Karl Benedict, known as Budabu, committed suicide in 1919 at the age of 19. Baldur, then only 12, interpreted this devastating loss as an act of despair against the new democratic system, an unwillingness to survive Germany's misfortune. Whether true or not, this subjective interpretation intensified his rejection of the Weimar Republic and reinforced his path toward becoming a nationalist German. His ideological inclinations were fed by reading material. During the Nuremberg trials, much later, he named 3 books that had profoundly shaped him. Among them were works steeped in anti-Semitism, including Adolf Bartel's World History of Literature, which Schirach noted carried anti-Semitism as its main thread. But the most decisive influence, he claimed, was the American car manufacturer Henry Ford's infamous polemic, The International Jew. He famously recounted, "I read it and became anti-Semitic." He saw Ford as a representative of success, leading many young Germans who looked toward America in those impoverished times to embrace his racist theories. By the time Baldur was 18 in 1925, he joined the National Socialist German Workers' Party, NSDAP. He began his university studies in Munich, focusing on German, English, and art history. Though he confessed his education was merely a sideline, his true priority was party work. He cultivated networks within Munich's anti-democratic and anti-Semitic circles, including the Salon hosted by Elsa and Hugo Bruckmann. It was through his youthful, bombastic poetry that fate brought him closer to the movement's leader. A heroic, patriotic poem Schirach wrote in 1925 was promptly printed in a nationalist newspaper, which caught the attention of Rudolf Hess. Hess sent Schirach an enclosed photograph of Hitler with a personal dedication. The young man's veneration of the leader, whom he viewed as a veteran of the First World War, only intensified, mirroring his formative experiences growing up in an officer's family. Hitler, having once advised the schoolboy to come to me in Munich if he chose to study, quickly recognized Schirach's potent blend of aristocratic confidence and fierce devotion. Schirach rapidly advanced, moving from university group leader of the National Socialist German Students' League in 1928 to eventually becoming its national leader, National Students' League leader, in 1929. His success lay in his strategy. He broadened the appeal of the student movement toward conservative bourgeois circles, contrasting sharply with rivals who focused only on the working or petty bourgeois strata. In 1931, the ambitious student leader advanced dramatically, becoming the Reich Youth Leader. He cemented this rise by marrying Henriette Hoffmann, the daughter of Hitler's personal photographer, Heinrich Hoffmann, thus weaving his fate even closer to the leader's inner circle. Schirach was rewarded for persuading Hitler that his rival, Kurt Gruber, was the wrong man to mobilize German youth on a national scale. Despite Gruber's early success, he quickly became known as a masterful propagandist. Together with his father-in-law, Heinrich Hoffmann, he created the book Hitler as No One Knows Him, filled with photographs and captions which had a sustained impact on bringing Hitler's image to broad sections of the population. The iconography of the leader, the gentle paternal figure, was largely Schirach's creation, framing the myth piece by piece, photo by photo. Schirach and the Hitler Youth he built were predicated on a foundational ideological premise. The youth belonged entirely to the state and the leader. He famously wrote that the youth should not seek profit or personal enjoyment, but rather service and sacrifice for the community. He cultivated a generation dedicated to hard-duty fulfillment. By 1936, Schirach achieved the pinnacle of his youth career. The law on the Hitler Youth came into force. He was appointed youth leader of the German Reich, heading a supreme Reich authority and reporting directly to the leader and chancellor. This law established totalitarian ideological goals. The entire German youth was to be educated within the Hitler Youth, physically, mentally, and morally, in the spirit of National Socialism, and to serve the people and the people's community. By this time, the Hitler Youth comprised approximately 6 million members. Although membership was formally voluntary until 1939, the organization quickly morphed into a compulsory state youth organization under the party's tight ideological control. The youth learned discipline, obedience, and the unquestioning acceptance of authority. He claimed that discipline was the foundation upon which the structure of the National Socialist Youth was erected. Schirach tirelessly promoted his movement through mass media. He headed a publishing company that produced magazines influencing youth work and music, such as Will and Power and The German Girl. He promoted the idea of the ideal party member, not a number among millions, but a soldier of an idea. The value of this youth, he maintained, was to be measured by their dedication to the community. He was highly successful at translating political ideology into popular culture, exemplified by his patronage of the propaganda film Hitler Youth Quecks in 1933. This film, featuring the battle song Forwards, Forwards, immortalized a young martyr and was intended for viewing by the entire youth organization. Through such pervasive use of media, Schirach ensured the regime's ideology permeated every aspect of young life. He believed youth should be educated in faith and loyalty to Hitler. Schirach also spearheaded diplomatic efforts, keen to establish an international presence for the Hitler Youth. He intensified contacts with the Italian fascist youth movement, the Opera Nazionale Balilla. He organized large mass events, sometimes alongside Goebbels, designed to display the power of the Hitler Youth. He traveled extensively between 1936 and 1938, meeting figures like Benito Mussolini and the Greek dictator Ioannis Metaxas. He even visited Turkey, where, by his own account, Kemal Ataturk was eager to learn about the Hitler Youth. This international maneuvering was an essential part of asserting the German Reich's position on the world stage. When war broke out, Schirach briefly returned to military service in 1940, serving on the Western Front as a private in the Motorized Infantry Regiment, Greater Germany, and was swiftly promoted to lieutenant. He was subsequently decorated with the Cross of Honor Second Class. However, the Army viewed his swift rise and decoration with skepticism, seeing it as political opportunism. Whispers among captured soldiers suggested he had conned his way into getting the EK2 before clearing off. The next significant turn in his career came in August 1940, when the leader called him to the headquarters and assigned him a new mission: Reich Governor and regional leader of Vienna. Schirach later saw this transfer as a clear political setback, pushing him away from the nerve center of power in Berlin. In Vienna, Schirach stepped into the role vacated by Joseph Bürkel. Schirach was immediately determined to pursue a different political course, seeking to better integrate formerly Austrian National Socialists. He presented himself to the Viennese, who reportedly soon called the good-looking young Nazi baron, due to his feudal attitude, as a fighter and revolutionary who would tackle the artistic and social problems left by his predecessor. His inaugural speech in the Konzerthaus Hall was grand, declaring his loyalty: "My regional administration, my Vienna, in my future life, that will be the object of my thoughts and studies, my cares and my loyalty. It is here that I see my new life's work." He stressed the importance of the people's community and his profound love for this blessed and gifted city with its immeasurable cultural treasures. The central pillar of his Vienna strategy was culture. He quickly built a cultural empire, using the sphere of art and culture to impress guests, raising Viennese self-esteem and mending fissures within the local party structure. He sought to elevate the Vienna State Opera and cultural institutions, promoting them as the foremost of the German Reich. He courted major figures, including the esteemed composer Richard Strauss and writer Gerhard Hauptmann. Schirach's cultural policy was designed not as resistance to the regime, but as a military element, a means of intensifying military strength by providing cultural motivation, reinterpreting the aggression as a defensive war to protect Viennese culture. He was, however, quickly drawn into bureaucratic and ideological conflict with Berlin, particularly with propaganda minister Goebbels, who rejected Schirach's idea of Vienna having a special European mission and feared Vienna might compete with Berlin as a cultural capital. Schirach also immediately took on new duties tied to the war effort. He was entrusted with the overall leadership of the extended relocation of children to the countryside KLV program. This massive logistical effort, involving the relocation of hundreds of thousands of children away from bomb-threatened cities like Berlin and Hamburg, was framed as keeping children safe, but it also served the ideological purpose of intensifying their re-education away from their parents and school structures. In 1942, Schirach attempted to execute a foreign policy coup by holding a European Youth Congress in Vienna and proposing a European Youth Association. He invited fascist youth leaders, but Hitler and Goebbels viewed this concept with suspicion, fearing it advocated a Europe of nations which countered Nazi Germany's dominance. Hitler sent only a taciturn telegram in response to Schirach's greetings, but the darker face of Schirach's time in Vienna quickly emerged. He became a key figure in the brutal persecution of Vienna's Jewish population. In a pivotal public address to members of the German Labor Front in June 1942, Schirach boasted of his main task: making this city free of Jews. This statement was met with sustained, thunderous applause. He proclaimed that Vienna, purified of Jews, would celebrate that autumn. Following this, he also gave an order to his subordinate officers to remove all Czechs from the city, receiving further rising and sustained thunderous applause. Schirach later suggested his severe rhetoric was purely a political strategy, a concession to Bormann. Yet his complicity in the systematic murder was undeniable. Surviving members of the Jewish community confirmed that deportations only began under Schirach's tenure and were conducted under his authority. He was also responsible for an aggressive policy toward anti-socials, arresting hundreds following a football stadium incident in 1940 and escalating inhumane treatment against them. During his post-war trial, Schirach claimed he only learned of the genocide from his friend Colin Ross in 1944, who read about it in foreign papers. This was a deliberate untruth. In fact, Schirach had already received definitive confirmation of the mass murder in the East from the regional leader of the Wartheland, Arthur Greiser, during a closed-door speech to the Leader Corps in Vienna on May 12, 1942. Greiser left no doubt that the Jewish population was being exterminated. The sources note that the transcript of Greiser's cynical performance revealed loud laughter and strong applause from the audience. Schirach occasionally used his high office to perform acts of mitigation for specific individuals. The most notable was his intervention on behalf of Alice Strauss, the Jewish daughter-in-law of Richard Strauss. Schirach successfully shielded her from the full brutality of the persecution, earning the composer's gratitude. Despite his later claims of moral distance, Schirach actively participated in the regime's large-scale looting. He possessed detailed knowledge of the seizure of Jewish assets. He acquired paintings and jewelry stolen from Jewish families through the Gestapo Administrative Department for Jewish Relocation Property, Vugesta. He purchased these stolen works for favorable prices, spending over 42,000 Reichsmark on confiscated art in just a 7-month period from 1942 to 1943. Though he would later claim none of his collection was of Jewish origin, clear evidence of confiscation through National Socialist persecution was established for several items. His cultural policies eventually brought his conflict with the Central Power to a climax. The exhibition Young Art in the German Reich that he sponsored in Vienna was deemed liberalistic disgrace by Hitler. The leader personally ordered its closure. The definitive break came during a tumultuous meeting at the leader's private Bavarian refuge, the Obersalzberg, in June 1943. His wife, Henriette, played a crucial role in this downfall by daring to confront Hitler over the brutal deportation of Dutch Jews. Goebbels gleefully noted in his diary that Frau von Schirach behaves like a stupid turkey and will not accept the leader's arguments in the slightest. After the spat, the leader was determined to distance himself from the Reich's governor, concluding that Schirach had become Viennese and was a weakling lacking political instinct. Hitler, however, hesitated to dismiss him outright, mainly due to a shortage of suitable successors. Schirach remained in his post, though politically marginalized. As the war entered its final bloody phase, Vienna faced intense bombing. Schirach, tasked as the Commissar for Defense, showed nervous urgency. He oversaw the construction of flak towers and established a regional battle post bunker on the Galitzenberg Hill. His constant visible dashes from his luxury villa to the bunker led to ironic whispers among the population, who renamed the street Heroes Street. By early 1945, Schirach witnessed the eerie final roll call of the Leader Corps in Berlin, finding the leader a broken man, dragging one lame leg with a trembling hand. Despite the desperate circumstances, Schirach proclaimed his loyalty to the leader's order to stand firm. Yet, as the Red Army approached Vienna, Schirach fled west, abandoning the city shortly before its liberation. His escape mirrored the military retreat, moving toward the planned but never realized Alpine fortress. In June 1945, after shaving off his mustache and adopting the pseudonym Dr. Richard Falk, A crime writer, Schirach voluntarily surrendered to American forces in Schwaz. He immediately stated his willingness to answer to an international court. His final historic act of self-presentation came during the International Military Tribunal in Nuremberg in 1946. Schirach adopted a unique and carefully calculated defense strategy distinct from most co-defendants. He admitted his personal moral and political guilt, stating, "I alone bear the guilt," acknowledging his role in educating a generation in faith and loyalty to a man who murdered by the millions. He attempted to shift his anti-Semitic leanings onto the influence of Henry Ford's book. Crucially, he rejected legal responsibility for the totality of the regime's crimes and consistently denied early knowledge of the mass extermination. His defense counsel argued that Schirach's open confession prevented the creation of a Hitler legend in the future. The defense strategy hinged on proving that Schirach had fully broken with the leader over the question of Jewish deportation. Schirach even attempted to curry favor with the American prosecutors, using his distant American heritage as a talking point. He also benefited greatly from the psychological assessment of U.S. forensic psychiatrists who considered him well-educated, imaginative, and, second to Hess, the Nazi without a vice. The tribunal ultimately acquitted him on the charge of conspiracy to wage aggressive war, count 1, concluding he was not involved in the planning of the wars. However, the court found him guilty of crimes against humanity, count 4. The judges noted that while he did not originate the deportation policy, he participated in it after becoming Reich Governor of Vienna, knowing that the Jewish victims could only hope for a miserable existence in the ghettos of the East. Furthermore, bulletins describing the extermination were available in his office. On October 1, 1946, Baldur von Schirach was sentenced to 20 years' imprisonment. His massive criticism of Hitler and his partial confession regarding the genocide had, in the end, persuaded the court not to impose the death penalty. He was transferred to the Allied prison in Spandau in 1947. His wife divorced him in 1949. He served his full sentence without the benefit of a political lobby. His sons, Klaus and Robert, worked tirelessly to secure his release and ensure better conditions for him in prison. Exactly 20 years after his sentencing, in October 1966, Baldur von Schirach was released. Upon his release, Schirach immediately sought to monetize his story, securing exclusive rights for a series of interviews and memoirs with the magazine Stern. He planned an extravagant lifestyle, estimating he would need over $1 million marks from his book deals to support his desired acquisitions of bespoke suits, dinner jackets, and coats. The subsequent memoir, I Believed in Hitler, 1967, was compiled by a ghostwriter from 1,500 pages of interview transcripts. The journalist who conducted the interviews believed Schirach's remorse was genuine, though he noted Schirach's perspective remained blinkered by his aristocratic origins. Schirach presented himself to the public as an elegant, remorseful gentleman. However, when interviewed in 1968 by the British star journalist David Frost, Schirach revealed a less critical stance. He described Hitler as a man without measure, one with great gifts, and even a genius. He was intentionally vague about his knowledge of the final solution, reiterating the false claim that he only heard of it in 1944. Regarding the deportation of Jews from Vienna, he offered the absurd excuse that he had supported their removal to the east because he feared they would be killed by the Viennese population. Following the media storm and the initial good sales of his memoirs, interest in Schirach waned. He eventually withdrew to a modest remote boarding house in Creuve. He had become irritable and isolated, having fallen out with many who had been close to him, including his ex-wife and her extended family. He reportedly no longer wished to talk about the war or the suffering it caused. Baldur von Schirach died of heart failure in Creuve on August 8, 1974. His former press officer, Gunther Kaufmann, delivered the eulogy, praising him as a man tossed to and fro and tested by fate, who served his time as a symbolic figure of the youth and their leaders. This framing, however, was rejected by many former youth leaders who disagreed with Schirach's partial confession at Nuremberg. The epitaph chosen for his grave by his companion, "I was one of you," was considered a puzzle, raising questions about the genuineness of his post-war reflections and whether he truly regretted his actions or merely his failure. The lease on his burial plot was not renewed in 2014, and the gravestone was finally leveled. Baldur von Schirach, the three-quarters American poet and propagandist, stands as a symbol of the educated elite who embraced terror and authoritarianism. He was the architect who shaped millions of young minds to serve a catastrophic ideal, a man whose ambition for power ultimately outweighed his moral conscience, leaving behind a legacy inseparable from the crimes committed under the banner of the youth leader. He was a man who believed in a leader who murdered by the millions, and in the end, that conviction cost him his life, his honor, and his freedom.